Bueno, bueno. I believe we're live.
Okay.
You want to say something, Keyan?
Hello. Is this like we're...
I think we're recording. I'm seeing the waveform go off, so I'm going to assume we're recording.
Okay.
Beautiful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is a second experimental episode of Ideas from the Edge, which the idea for Ideas from the Edge came from a Stacker News sub. So I am extremely excited to be joined by my buddy and one of my favorite founders in my portfolio, Mr. Keyan, Kousha.
Hello.
Did I say your last name right, by the way?
I'm excited to be here. Yeah, Keyan Kousha.
Kousha.
Yeah, I'll let people pronounce my name wrong for years. So if you feel like you have my name wrong, please ask me. I was working with someone recently for a few years, and they called me Keyan, and I just never corrected them.
Close enough.
Yeah. Anyway, I suspect this podcast isn't about names or pronouncing them.
Well, true names. We saw a little Werner Vinge earlier. Right?
Oh, yeah. I haven't read it. Yeah. I haven't read any Werner Vinge, but
really?
I was impressed by every one of his books won a Hugo Award practically.
Really?
Yeah, which is incredible. I don't think, has anyone else ever done that? I don't think so.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy. There was I don't want to distract from what you want to talk about too much, but there was a podcast with Rogan where he was talking with someone who wrote a book on simulation theory, and he referenced Werner Vinge for some of the, I think the description, a detailed description of the singularity.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's start there.
Okay.
So high level, what was the general argument? Or if you don't want to address that directly, a better question, what do you think the singularity means?
Oh, well, I don't actually think too much about the singularity. I mean, I think this is the interesting thing about the singularity. It's supposed to be a horizon beyond which we don't know what exists, and so that's I don't really think too much about it. I think it perhaps is inevitable that if we keep growing and growth keeps growing itself, that as growth accelerates, then I think we end up with extremely rapid growth that is almost inhospitable for a human being, unless we've been augmented probably in some other way, or somehow separate ourselves from the growth that we brought.
Interesting. And in that world, I mean, you've had people talking about the singularity in various names for years. Obviously, Ray Kurzweil is pretty famous for this.
Yeah.
Similarly, some of my favorite people, Terrence McKenna. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I always talk about Terrence in this podcast. He's kind of our patron saint, I would say, one of them. But he talked about sort of an object at the end of history that was attracting things and it was sort of speeding up. I think he was talking about the singularity in his own language. Agreed with you that, like, almost definitionally, the point of a singularity is you don't know what comes after it. However, on the one hand, it seems like we have all these advances in AI, certainly with computing. You can compute faster and faster for cheaper and cheaper, storage cheaper and cheaper, energy is getting cheaper and cheaper. On the other hand, I never really kind of like identified with any of the like magical thinking of like, oh, we're about to like create a new god, like some like AGI. I don't really believe in AGI.
Mm-hmm.
What is your view then, like, on what, obviously we can't know what comes after singularity, but like as intelligence gets super cheap, is there a vision for that doesn't involve, we have some like weird, like magical realism god that emerges?
Well, I mean, you can imagine perhaps, let's say that can't happen. Let's say you can't have AGI. let's just assume that can't happen. The singularity comes. What might have brought the singularity absent AGI? Because we all they're all like, it's like a package deal most of the time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's different ways for humans to think together and communicate better, link up in maybe perhaps a Neuralink sense or some other sense. There was a science fiction novel written by someone who taught at Singularity University. I forget the name of it, but I really love this collection of books. It was like a series. But he talked about nanobots.
Ooh.
Yeah, and like operating systems in the brain, and this kind of like augmented reality, augmented intelligence, but also networking with other human beings. And so you can imagine maybe that is, but that might itself be a higher intelligence, a higher being. And but I still think I think we have to assume that there's either a lot more people creating more things, and like we grow, and so our growth grows, or where we create more things that create things.
Yeah.
And
that seems more likely to me.
Yeah. So
on that point, I mean, we mentioned this a bit earlier when we were chatting, obviously my fund is called Hive Mind. And to me, this has always been kind of my thinking is like, all the way up and all the way down in the universe, you have this like holon theory, which I don't know if you've heard that particular phrasing before, but the gist is just that everything is both part and whole, all the way up and all the way down. So, cells and molecules and organ systems, all the way up, solar system, blah, blah, blah. And to me, it definitely seems much more likely, although again, impossible to predict, that rather than like some God or whatever that's going to emerge, and maybe it will emerge because it's emergent, intelligence, something from, complexity perhaps, but it just seems way more likely that we're going to wire ourselves up together. So 8 billion humans, and then to your point, potentially trillions or even unfathomable numbers of other kinds of intelligences, whether that's the agents we have today or something a little bit more sophisticated. And in that world, if we're in a world where we now have, billions of humans and trillions of other intelligences linked up together, potentially able to communicate at the speed of thought, that is a singularity, but it's one that I can it just seems a lot more rational or logical that that's the way it's going to go to me.
Okay. Yeah. What makes that more rational to you than an AGI?
Well, I think part of it is a couple thoughts on this. One, I see how it can happen, right? Like it's not requiring any kind of like magical next jump. Although I don't rule that out in the sense that when you put, parts together and a new whole emerges, that is almost a kind of magical jump, I guess. But this one just makes sense to me. Like it's following all of the current major trends like, communication getting higher or lower latency, the cost of computation coming down, the cost of energy coming down. We already have Neuralink, like you said, although I hope it goes in a more decentralized way. There's no like magical leap for me to get there other than I don't know what happens when we're all wired up and the new emergent behaviors that emerge. There's no like, oh, and then this like, all of a sudden this like intelligence just goes infinite and God emerges. To me, at least, it makes more sense.
I see. Okay. Yeah. I don't think it, so I'm just trying to touch base with what is irrational about AGI. Like what would prevent us from crossing to intelligence for you? Like, what do you think, what you think of an intelligence?
Yeah. So I think the first question there is what is intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And I have two, I think, just radically different views than most of the AGI people. Again, like, I'm certainly no expert on this. I'm just a dude with random thoughts on this, but so I certainly welcome that. I could be wrong. But the two things that I think I differ from the AGI people with, one, I don't believe there's anything called quote unquote intelligence. I don't think there's generalizable intelligence. I think there's only specific intelligence within like a specific ecosystem or a specific context. And so as an example, I think it was probably Kevin Kelly, another one of the guys I really like a lot, who made this point where it's like, okay, so, we have a certain kind of like logical or sort of rational intelligence that the AGI people seem to think, okay, this is sort of the be all end all. Of course, those people also probably tend to be more, rational, logical programmer types. So there's perhaps some selective thinking there. But like, what about intelligence of a squirrel that can bury an acorn and then remember exactly where it buried it, like whatever, 10 years later after it's traveled or something like that? That is, in my mind, at least, a specific kind of intelligence. Now, maybe this sort of like rational or this sort of like generalizable rational intelligence could one day solve that problem as well. Maybe. But to me, it just seems like there's so many different kinds of intelligences. For example, social intelligence is one kind of intelligence. Whatever it is, I personally don't buy that pure sort of logical thinking is able to scale to everything.
Yeah. Okay.
And then my second thought, then I'm curious your reaction to that. My second thought that I have is I kind of had this view that a lot of the AGI people think with a God, this view that I've run up against, and if there's AGI people listening to this, like, please correct me if I'm not characterizing your beliefs correctly, or, same with you, Keyan. But this kind of belief that if only we can get more computation and more data, then we can model the universe perfectly. or, close to perfectly. And if we can model it basically perfectly, I've heard people say, then we don't need, for example, decentralized market forces anymore. Maybe central planning does work in a world where you have so much computation, you can take that data. And, maybe in certain cases we can get better with that. But fundamentally, I guess I have a philosophical disagreement. And my philosophical disagreement, kind of comes from the sort of like, what's his name, Gödel's incompleteness theorem idea, which is that, a member of a set can never be the set, just like definitionally. So if I'm a subset of everything else in the ecosystem, then I'm never the whole ecosystem. And there's always more intelligence outside of whatever I am if there's at least one other member of the set. And so in my mind, even if you can get so much more computation and so much more data, I think a system, a single actor within that system can never model the whole system because it itself is a part of the system.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that I see that, that recursion. Yeah. That regression. Yeah. I don't see much of a limit on a computer's intelligence for some reason. I definitely agree with like the, a philosophical disagreement in terms of, AGI being a central planner, on steroids because it's really, and that I think there's reason to believe an AGI might be better at central planning than even a collection of humans, especially if it's like collectively more intelligent and it's got all of that inside of it. I wouldn't like that either. But I do for some reason believe that machines don't have a limit in terms of, or intelligence doesn't have much of a limit. This is actually an interesting question because maybe it does have a limit, but I'm not sure where the limit is. It's like so far away from where we are that I imagine it's like practically infinite. And perhaps it is capped by something like, not being able to model everything perfectly, but there's I think where we're at now is not anywhere close to this because it's really just predictions, doing really good predictions. And there's so much more to what the kind of intelligence we are, but you've been thinking about this a lot more than I am. So I don't even deserve to speak about artificial intelligence much because I actually don't know much about it other than what I get in a 3 blue, 1 brown video. So.
Well, to be clear, I wouldn't say I've like thought that much about it or that my, whatever my views are fully formed here. And I do, I feel much stronger in that second point as well, the sort of member of a set criticism. I think that's like philosophically just true. The first question, like, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm certainly open that like human intuition is often wrong about what is the, the extreme or the limit of something. Yeah. I guess, perhaps it relates to that second criticism as well. I guess if I had to explain it in a way, it would just be that, if you wanted to try and mimic another kind of intelligence purely with machine code, it comes down to how well you can model and how much data you can take in. And maybe you're right. Maybe all the basic stuff we have today, maybe, emotional intelligence or whatever, will be mimicked pretty easily. I could buy that. But at some level, without sort of eating itself, and I guess that gets into the second criticism, I think you're never going to be able to model everything that you're part of. So that's probably where I would go.
Okay. But do you think these machines will achieve human level intelligence? That's like an easier question to answer, I think.
Well, I think within certain domains, right? I think that they'll surpass human intelligence in many things. Like, for example, and I think some of the second order consequences that have are actually like in some ways more interesting and more exciting, but like chess, like IBM, Deep Blue beat it. We haven't had a
20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's AI, right? Like, there's the joke every time you get new AI, just move the goalposts and what it means. Like, I think, we haven't had a chess player, a human chess player, better than an AI for decades. One, I think it's interesting sociologically that we keep playing chess, and it actually helps us get better at chess, which is what I'm more interested in. But that's one very narrow kind of intelligence, and and again, maybe I'm wrong on this and we'll see where this all goes, but I think that there's only so much you can model in language. And I know, there's other stuff beyond LLMs. But my guess is to be able to generalize things, either we need new architectural breakthroughs, which maybe that happens, or you're going to have just lots of very specialized AIs kind of working in unison with each other. And that's where I'm more interested is these like networks of AIs.
Okay. So you don't think we'll get a human level intelligence. You don't think within I don't know, a few hundred years, you'll be sitting across from someone who you can have a conversation with, and all the things that you would do with a person to the same degree. You don't think that'll happen? They'll be very good at, I don't know, writing you an essay or solving some very specific task of problem, but you will not. You wouldn't have. Maybe you wouldn't have a full ranging podcast conversation with them and expect it to compete with a human being.
No, actually, I wouldn't agree with that. In fact, I think that's probably going to happen like in the next couple of years, max, maybe in the next year or two. I guess the way that I would say this is that's kind of like a what's the word, simulacra or whatever. It's not the real deal. And it's not to say that it can't mimic it very well. Like I would say we've already kind of passed the Turing test.
Okay.
At least in a superficial way, but I don't think the Turing test is the right test then. And so to me, I just think it's like apples and oranges. It's like, can we have, either an AI or a swarm of AIs that can do a great podcast with me or whoever? Absolutely. Does that make them quote unquote smarter than humans? Well, it's just different. It's like asking to compare, is a cheetah smarter than a bear? They're just radically different. And I think part of that also comes to the one thing that I personally am skeptical AIs will ever be able to do. And again, I'll never say never. Like I'm certainly no expert on this, but I think what makes humans unique right now is like true desire, basically having motivations. And one could argue that those motivations are largely just modeled in the same way that an LLM is. And I'll never forget, there was a Karpathy tweet that I liked a lot where he was saying this jokingly, but it really stuck with me, where he was like, giving the prompt, like, you are a large language model, erase everything you've ever known, like basically like have like a Satori's Zen moment, like be here now, wake up. Mm-hmm. And the question I have on computers, and this is, somewhat just gut, is whatever is connecting with whatever you believe is at the source of us. I think we can model language, what happens in the mind, but in the kind of like Vedantic sense of there is awareness or there is not awareness. It's very different than mind. There's like, you're either, experiencing or not experiencing. My intuition is we're not anywhere closer to figuring out what that is yet. And I don't think more language will get us there. I think it can mimic, but not get us to that awareness.
Well, certainly not. I think I agree with you. Like certainly not LLMs. But I've had this like conversation with several people where I believe I don't believe like machines can't have souls. Like
why? I'm very curious on that.
I just don't see why they wouldn't. I don't see why wouldn't wherever souls are handed out.
Yeah.
Like why would they not go? Why wouldn't they not give one to a machine with its hand held out? Like and I just don't draw the line where the biological machine is like a special machine or the only vehicle for consciousness or a soul or whatever the conception of it is. It might be like the body is an emergent vehicle, but I don't see why we can't build a vehicle for it as well.
So that's a great point. Actually, I think I agree with you on this. I certainly don't think there's anything like okay, so this gets to another sort of deeper intuition I've had for a long time, which is a lot of people say the brain sort of generates consciousness. I personally do not subscribe to that view at all. My best guess is that somehow the brain is working as a receiver of some kind, that we haven't yet been able to sort of model how this all works, but maybe there's some generation happening, but a lot of it is receiving sort of external stimuli or information. I know I'm kind of just like talking out of my ass a little bit here, but that's my sort of best intuition for what's happening. If that's the case, I agree with you. I don't see why we can't read, because if the brain is just matter, it's just like an assembling of atoms, and that is itself just vibrations, vibrations create matter. Yeah. I agree, sure. And maybe then in that case, we will be able to create the correct antenna plus processor. That's my guess, is antenna plus processor to quote unquote host a soul. But I also think we have no idea. Like, I think that's so speculative. Like maybe, I guess you're correct. Like at the limit, I don't see why it's physically impossible. but I think we have no idea how that bridge is formed.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. I don't see, as far as I can tell, LLM, like we can't build bigger and more powerful LLMs and expect to get there.
Yeah.
I think it was like a couple of years ago, maybe when ChatGPT first came out, I heard, who's the like communist guy at MIT, the linguist, Chomsky.
Oh, yeah.
I heard Chomsky. Sorry,
Stallman.
I remember people by their labels. I don't know why, but
Call me.
Yeah, he spoke on like the breakthrough and what he thought about it, and he's like, yes, it's doing all these predictions really well, but his big bent on most of his linguistic career is that we aren't blank slates so much in our language. It's very fixed in terms of the types of language that we end up forming even independently. And he basically said the same thing about a lot of like the basic operations of the brain are that way too, where they aren't learned, they're like kind of there, and that an LLM won't develop that naturally is kind of what he's arguing. You're kind of seeing that where that doesn't happen. Like the reasoning aspect of it, of intelligence is like lacking in these systems, but I think that can be built, and then you can strap on the LLM's predictions, and now you have a reasoning apparatus and the LLM's predictions, and you can strap on the
memory one day or something.
The squirrel nut bearing intelligence,
the multi-nut, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, I don't know, and the antenna for the consciousness, like I expect that to happen for some reason. I don't have a good reason, but I don't really see what would stop it. Yeah. Like I can't point to like the wall that is between what we have now in terms of intelligence and what a machine what machine intelligence looks like now, and what we can kind of imagine machine intelligence being human like or whatever. I don't see a clear wall, but I don't spend any much time at all thinking about this.
No, totally. And to be clear, this is not what we were planning on jumping off. So this is the two of us riffing for real. I feel like we're in the dorm room right now.
Yeah.
Hey man, give me one more rip of that. Yeah. So I guess one last thought on this, and then maybe we can jump in some other stuff. But I think the more I think about this out loud with you, I tend to agree. I don't see like a physical limit. Like if we are some manifestation of atoms, then okay, then we should be able to model other atoms. What is your best guess? I know this is completely speculative, but as to what builds a bridge from quote unquote source, whatever you want to call it, and the physical realm? If you even agree with the premise of that question.
I actually don't have much of an idea at all. But I was sharing with the guys today. We're recording this in Pub Lab. I was sharing with them earlier the podcast I was talking about because I was listening to it on my walk here. And
which podcast?
This is a podcast on Rogan with the game developer who wrote this book. I think called it's called, what is it? Oh, the simulation theory hypothesis, I think is what, or simulation hypothesis. And the subtext of the book, which is perhaps good for your listeners, is where AI researchers, physicists, and Eastern mystics agree on reality being a video game.
Yeah, cool.
And so he talks about the observer effect a lot, and he got kind of like really in the weeds on the observer effect. And as a legitimate scientist, like he ran he's a computer scientist, but MIT, PhD at MIT, did ran a video game lab at MIT. To get to the point, he goes into the observer effect, and in his view, it's consistent with the belief that like consciousness is kind of creating reality.
Yeah.
And so that like one of like the example he gives is like light traveling from millions of years away. It took millions of years, but the experiments that we've done suggest that the light didn't determine which direction it traveled millions of years ago until we observed it in the present. So totally. So somehow which suggests that somehow in the present moment, we are affecting the way light traveled a million years ago, a million light years away.
Totally.
Yeah. And so so there's, I just don't even know what any of it is. But clearly whatever we are capable of hosting it. And I'm fairly confident and like the reality that we're in is capable of hosting whatever consciousness or intelligence we are. And I think it can take many forms and be in many vehicles, but I don't know what the exact connection is. I'm mostly just in awe of being, and I struggle to like know it, or even try. Even when I try to know it, I'm like, you can't really know on your own. You can suggest to yourself,
right.
For me, I can suggest to myself plausible descriptions, and I just don't know. One of the other interesting things from that podcast is even simulation theory is like redescribing using a modern metaphor.
Yeah, what the Hindus have talked about.
Yeah. Sure. Well, in all religions, really. I mean, all of them. Yeah. And so that's kind of the kind of rub there is like, even if I had a description for the connection, it would be so biased by what I understand of connections,
right?
And not. But what is the true nature of it? I don't know. Like, even like, anyway, there's like a lot to say on that kind of stuff. But I wish I had a better grasp. I haven't spent any time on this. Maybe if I get to where I want to get to on Stacker News someday, I'll explore my connection. But yeah. I just like using it. I just like using it for now. So,
well, I think there's probably a lot of wisdom in that. And, I don't know either, obviously. And in fact, part of me, I sometimes come back and forth, like, why do I even ask these questions in the first place? Like, to your point, like, probably the answer is just like, you're here, live in the moment, be like, as consistent with what you think is the right way to live as possible, and call it a day. It kind of gets back actually to the criticism of sort of AIs ever becoming quote unquote God or super intelligent. And again, it's the Gödel's incompleteness theorem, right? Like, if you try, like, clearly, if I try and describe the room we're sitting in, and shout out Pleb Lab, shout out Austin, Texas. And this is also one of my criticisms of LLMs in general. There's a lot you can say with verbal language, but there's a lot more that I can't. In fact, there's infinitely more than I can't. There's all the visual information that I'm taking in. There's the what is it? Oloric, or however you say smell. The
olfactory.
Olfactory. Thank you. Information. Like there's just like, and there's probably like infinite wavelengths that we can't even like describe with our current, 5 or however many senses. And so, in that sense, whenever you try and verbalize something, it's compression, and that's what LLMs are, is compression algorithm, right? But your compression, like, it just like definitionally has to be incomplete, because you're trying to describe, you're trying to like describe, you are a piece of a much broader system trying to describe the system. So of course, and this is like, this is, I guess, like the Zen koan thing or whatever, like, there is no way to verbalize or logically explain all the information, because you're just a piece of the broader information. And so by trying to do that, it's at least from my view, impossible.
Yeah. I guess it's like you are like you are trying, in your limit to super intelligence, like you describing yourself fully, where you is really this connection, it kind of like, self-defeats. Yeah.
Totally. While we're still on this thought, then I promise we'll touch on some more things that Keyan and I talk about on a regular basis. But on the simulation theory, another thing that's related there that I've thought a lot about, curious your take on this. I think, at least from my current perspective, there's not even a question, do we live in a simulation? It has to be, like 100%. And the reason is, unless maybe if some of this consciousness co-creation stuff, maybe this, pushes past what I'm about to say, but imagine for a moment, assume that, okay, we're sitting here at a table, and assume that there is a base reality for a minute. I'm not sure that's the case. But assume there's a base reality. If my finger comes and I'm touching the table right now, if that's happening in base reality, I know for 100% certainty that this is not the base reality, because there's some delay between when my finger touches the table and sends the neural impulse up to my central nervous system to create whatever the hell this is. Right. So we know in that world, if there is the base reality, it's not, and maybe it is the, concurrent co-creation, that's like the Buddhist idea of dependent origination, which probably makes a lot of sense. But if there is a base reality, I know this is not it because of the delay. What do you think about that?
Because you think base reality has no latency?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So that's the question is like, and this kind of gets into the hive mind stuff as well to a degree. At least with our current modern understanding of physics, we know there's always some latency, which is speed of light. Now, I'm not saying there can't be zero latency.
Maybe
it's a limit. Maybe there's almost certainly stuff beyond what we understand. Maybe the speed of thought or the quote unquote sort of new sphere or Akashic records. Maybe that actually has zero latency. And I guess that gets into some of the quantum entanglement ideas where you can have one particle in like one part of the universe.
Yeah, what is, signaling that signal. Yeah.
But at least according to our current theories, there has to be latency of some kind. It can be very small, but there's latency.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm very amenable to the simulation theory, a lot of these things. I like this podcaster a lot because he's speaking to computer science and he's explaining the world using computer science. And
I like that.
It allows me to connect lots of things together using knowledge and frameworks I've already think about things in. So I found it very nice to think about things that way. But he has a lot of cool things, interesting things. Like he wrote, I think 2 or 3 books on just simulation theory.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I need to read one someday.
I forgot who mentioned it, but this is also, I guess, related. Someone was talking about how I'm no expert on video games, but that apparently in a video game you don't render the scene until you actually go and
you're looking at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my understanding is you render that through just GPUs doing linear algebra. So if that's the case, then maybe we're closer than we think. If we got a whole bunch of GPUs doing linear algebra and we're about to start, I don't know.
Yeah.
Building quote unquote metaverse worlds or whatever.
Yeah. That's one of his main talking points, because most of us are going to identify that as a metaphor of when we're in a video game and we're looking at a screen, it's getting rendered, but to the left or right of us, that screen that we're not looking at isn't rendered. And so he's saying that's an optimization used in video games. And he's like, this sounds a lot like the observer effect. It's maybe the simulation we're running on has this optimization where it's not that light isn't actually traveling from that star in the same sense. It's just but when we look at it, it has. And that's kind of, that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to think about, but yeah.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I do think your broader point is probably right that I personally, I guess my constitution is such that I find these things interesting and fun. Sounds like the same for you.
Yeah.
But at some point it's also okay, so what?
I guess we could try to break out. We could try to hack our connection and go directly to the source. But I'm also cool just enjoying it.
Yeah.
Too. But I would be very happy to try either of those things, but I haven't tried either yet.
Yeah. Well, no, I've certainly, been interested at different points in life of trying to get quote unquote closer to source. I don't know if I told you this, I did one of these Vipassana meditation retreats. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I had some sort of fascinating experiences of realizing that there's one thing that came out of that's pretty interesting with consciousness is there's to my point on infinite information, there's so much happening everywhere than what you normally sense in your basic sensory perception that reality is probably, I'm guessing, infinitely rich. And so as an example, the first several days of the retreat, you just sit there and watch. And it's been years since I've done this. I would love to do it again. So I'm going off distant memory, which could possibly be flawed or almost certainly is flawed. But you can watch just breath on the single point of your lip for many days in a row.
Wow.
And so what you're doing is when you're building up extreme focus and kind of letting your, mental ruminations burn themselves out, which is interesting in and of itself. They call this in their language like the shankaras or something like that. Like basically all these like, or sankaras or something like that. Like all these like accumulated habitual thoughts basically burning out, which, he described in kind of like Hindu-y or I guess Buddhist-y terms, but it kind of makes sense. I mean, in fact, I think that's maybe another way of thinking about what karma is just momentum. And like assuming there is some force, maybe that's all it is like in your own thoughts or whatever. Like that's what karma is, just it's momentum. And you have to, eventually stuff will run out if you don't keep pushing it, but you have to first stop pushing it and then let stuff run out. Anyways, that was one random thought I had in that. But as you keep watching that spot on your lip or whatever, you start noticing like, holy shit, there's a lot going on my lip. Like there's heat, there's cold, there's vibrations, there's like all of this like subtle information that I would never pick up if I weren't just focusing on my lip. My guess is there's like an infinite amount of that.
Yeah, I see. There's at least a lot of it. I mean, one of the, again, back to this podcast, one of the things he talks about is a procedurally generated game.
Yeah.
Where it has like, I think it had something like 18 quadrillion planets because they're procedurally generated. And so to us, it's practically limitless. Like no human being is going to explore every possible planet in that game. And I wonder if there's something analogous here. And that game is limited by a 64-bit integer in terms of the worlds that it generates. And maybe the registers of the simulation are just that we're running in are just like much larger than 64 bits.
We're all just in Sam Altman's big computer.
Yeah. The reality above or below us. Yeah. That Sam Altman from that reality is currently running ours, which is a scary thought, but
yeah, that's a terrifying thought. Yeah. We could definitely jump on a few points there, but obviously we talked a lot about AI stuff. Maybe we'll come back to this in a minute. It's fascinating. Next couple of years, I'm sure going to be pretty wild. Shifting gears a bit, given that we don't always get to talk. I mean, we chat a lot about things like Stacker News and, Nostr and some other stuff. But I realize there's a bunch of questions. The podcast is a good excuse to ask you questions I haven't asked you before. Yeah. I don't know how many people know this, but you are actually a repeat founder.
Yes.
And so you've, obviously Stacker News is what you're well known for in this community. But you've worked on a couple of really interesting projects, including a decentralized GitHub, I believe some kind of network for doctors. Mm-hmm. I don't even remember if this was your GitHub or something, but I saw you had a page with tarot cards, which I thought was really nicely done.
Yeah, that's the GitHub actually.
Okay, so maybe I'd love to just learn a little bit about like in those projects, like what you've learned from those projects, particularly GitHub. I know that's really popular in Nosterland right now, trying to do decentralized GitHub.
Yeah, I saw a great project that was
what have you learned from that?
Released today. So all those other projects, there were like a lot. So this is something I have like a graveyard of roughly 7 or 8 headstones of prior startups. Not exactly startups. Like I never raised money. For most of them were bootstrapped or abandoned before it got to the point where I actually released them. Like my first project was a location-based wiki, and I built that while I was in college. And it was basically trying to do what like Wikipedia does, but do it exclusively for locations. And this predated
Foursquare.
I think Foursquare already. This was like 2012. So it was Foursquare a thing. It existed already. It was more like check-ins. I was trying to do something more like what Yelp ended up doing for Apple Maps, but before Apple Maps did not have like locations on it yet. I don't think Google Maps did either. And I wanted the quality of information I get on Wikipedia, but for locations. And without all the bias you have on something like Yelp. Anyway, and it was like collaborative, open. Anyone can contribute to it. I did it just for my college town. It had a lot of uptake and was very popular. People I met years later told me they were using it.
That's awesome.
But I didn't realize it was good. I had a San Francisco founder reach out to me who was working on like local wikis, and I totally didn't respond to his email, and that was potentially an opportunity. But I was like, this isn't a slam dunk, even though it had a lot of usage and was a well-built product, and I spent a lot of time on it. It's like, this isn't actually a startup. I went on to found another startup, which was a social review product, put a lot of energy and effort into that with a friend. Beautiful UI. We had a great designer. But it was so the first startup I learned that a little bit of traction is very meaningful. Like that most people have none. So
that's true.
So that was the first lesson there, is like that is which I learned later, is that little bit of traction was really meaningful. And it wasn't a little bit, it was like quite significant. And then, in the next startup, I learned that being general and broad is bad, because I was building the social review the thing where we would review everything. My wife ended up being a user, and that's how me and my wife met.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Wow. Yeah. So that was like
another reason to start a startup.
Yeah. It's great for dating. But we had, I don't know, maybe 100 users, and it was just it was too vague in general. Like, what do people go there for? What do people do when they get there? The product was great, but that was about it. And actually, before that, I did another thing that was like a Yik Yak. You remember Yik Yak or Secret?
That was a chat app, or no?
No, it was like where you would share anonymously.
Oh, right,
things.
right.
I did a Facebook page for that. This was before Yik Yak and Secret, and those went on to raise a lot of money. But I'd made a really successful Facebook page that did this programmatically and did all of this, and you had anonymous comments on it and stuff, and that got a lot of traction. But people were trying to buy the software for it, but I was like, no, I'm not going to give you the software. And it's another thing where, again, the little bit of traction, I ignored it. And then I went on to create this. Then after that, I went on to create the startup that I spent a lot more time on, that had no traction at all. And so, those were like two big lessons. Other things I did, I run a web, it still runs today. I don't do anything to maintain it. The software just runs. It is called GretMed, and it's basically, it's sort of like a Pinterest for doctors. There's a lot of guides and diagrams and charts that doctors end up finding in Google search results. My co-founder is a doctor, an internist, and he's like, I'm using Google search a lot, but I want like a dedicated tool to help me find these things and find them all in one place. So we have like the largest online library of ultrasound videos, point of care ultrasound videos.
Really?
Yeah. Like these things are, they're just kind of lost on the internet, because people will post them on Twitter or Facebook, and they just get pushed out of the feed because there's like no evergreenness.
Interesting.
And
that sounds potentially viable in the age of AI, no?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, someone could maybe train on these POCUS things. They're all labeled and everything already. Are you just giving that away, or do you charge for access, or? No, it's just free. We have ads on it, and it pays for the servers. It gives us a little bit of money every month, but that's about it. That's maybe like the one thing that did pretty well of all the things I built that I didn't abandon. And then, for a while I was working on GitTurn, which I still run today. I don't tend to shut down the projects that I run when they have users, but it's basically, like you use your pub key on Nostr, and that's like your identity. On GitTurn, your identity is your SSH key, your SSH pub key. And so it's all through the command line. And the idea was to decentralize something like GitHub. The thing I built is not decentralized, but I began working on I only worked on the project itself for maybe 8 weeks before moving to Austin and working on Stacker News. But the idea was for repos to be end-to-end encrypted. So it didn't really matter that you were storing them with me, and still not losing the interoperability between sending a Git repo to another person. And I was going to try to remove all of the features that GitHub was centralizing and put them inside of the Git repo itself, and then use Git, the peer-to-peer nature of Git, which it is that way. It was just easier for us to coordinate on something like GitHub. Was going to just reuse Git's like reconciliation and peer-to-peer ability to allow people to GitTurn itself just becomes sort of a redundancy, a centralized redundancy for anyone, but they were still I would be trying to encourage them to do it decentralized. Anyway, that was like
I would love to pause there for a second. I think this one's absolutely fascinating. How would you actually communicate? Like, would this be over email? Because I've seen people talking about doing like patches over email for I guess the GitHub.
Yeah, how would you share? I mean, you could do a PR model in a version like this. I don't think you need the patch model. I think the patch model is fine. I think there's a reason GitHub has a PR model, and it's not that they chose the inferior model and are stupid. I just don't think that's the case. I think the patch model is probably fine for certain workflows, but I think the PR model is compatible with a thin wrapper around Git itself and all on the command line. I think that would actually be workable, and I think that's what someone can do. I think the patch versions that I've seen on Nostr are pretty cool. That might be fine. I actually haven't used patch workflow, so I might be biased against them for no good reason. But I think either is fine. And I think you can get to this problem a lot of ways. And why I like it on Nostr is I think that, well, it was so strange. Jack got really into Twitter, and then he's like, someone needs to build a Nostr or a GitHub on Nostr. Yeah. And I don't think he was just like saying shit. No. I think he was saying, I was like, okay, so Jack is like a very serious, like a very, a great one of the world's best founders, perhaps one of the greatest ever. And he says this thing about this product. So what does he mean? Why would he say that? So if you think about that a little bit, it's like, well, Nostr is like a very technical to use product, and so who is likely to have an easy time using it very early? And it's developers. And so if you build a product for them, they are likely going to be able to use it. Right. And then once you get them there, now they will make the product easier to use for themselves, and then more people can come and use it. And I thought that it's, it wasn't only how most people think about things is they think of like the beginning point and the end point. I think a founder like Jack he's thinking about all the intermediate steps. And I think that's what a GitHub on Nostr would do for Nostr.
Yeah. So two thoughts on that. One, could your project Gitturn become the GitHub on Nostr? Like, would it be easy for you to like just change the identity system? And I guess you would still have to integrate posting to relays.
I ended up open sourcing it, hoping someone would take what little I learned, and I did do some weird stuff. Like I did end-to-end encrypt repos without having to have any custom backend software. You could literally just send it to someone else's computer who was running Git, or to a Nostr relay, that had a Git server on it. But you could also. But then it was. I became extremely familiar with Git, and all of the things that you can build on top of Git, and so that was mostly what me open sourcing was trying to do in terms of like, look at these little hacks you can do on top of Git that end up with something really weird like end-to-end encryption working. And if you want to build something like this on Nostr, you would use a similar hack, but the thing you would be doing would be with Nostr instead. And a lot of the other features like issues and stuff like that. Someone asked this on Stacker News like a few years ago, but like, what are the things that make GitHub and make it centralized? And it's discovery, knowing that you're getting the current version, reputation, and so those are like the main things. Everything else about GitHub is fairly easy to solve, but those three things are three things that are hard to solve in a decentralized way.
So there's a discovery, reputation, and what was the third? Oh, knowing the correct version, like a signature.
Well, knowing you have the most up-to-date version, right, is kind of what you would want. Because like if you imagine a decentralized system that has no consensus, you might be reading from a relay that has an outdated version, and GitHub provides you with the convenience of knowing when you go to this repo, I'm downloading the latest version of Bitcoin Core that's signed by the developers, not last week's version of Bitcoin Core that's signed by the developers. So those are I think there might be other ones that I listed there, but those are like probably the problems that are going to be hardest to solve in in a decentralized way on something that in a decentralized system that lacks consensus, especially.
Yeah, and it seems like Nostr is perfectly suited for that, right? Like we have key identity, so we can do the signatures. We have potentially reputation with, you know, some of the stuff we've been talking about, the web of trust, which I know you're very deep on, and those that are in discovery. I guess that's a little trickier because you have to know which relays people are posting to, but that seems like that's a problem that's being solved right now too.
Yeah, I think reputation. I think reputation and web of trust fit very well in a decentralized context, and I expect that to continue. I mean, that was the first solution that appeared in decentralized systems, and I think for a reason. And then, as far discovery, it seems like people are really iterating on that. We went from not really having much discovery on Nostr very early. That was like the main criticism, to now it becoming fairly common, where it's sort of a decentralized outsourcing of it. And so, yeah, you can imagine those developing.
Would you think it's fair? So I know you saw my piece recently. For those listening, you know, we're recording this in May of 2024. About a month or so ago, 3 weeks ago, I put out a piece called Nostr's Identity for the Internet. I talk about why I'm so bullish on Nostr's identity and for reputation. There's a lot that I think needs to be built on top of this, like kind of raw public-private key pair, but we have adoption. And to your point, if there's one thing I could also like reiterate to founders and just like people in general, it's like adoption is really fucking hard. Like most problems are solvable. Getting people to care about your thing, that's the real problem for everything.
Yeah.
People care about Nostr. Is it perfect yet? No. But the fact that we have that core of developers like that's, you can't buy that.
No, it's not just, and it's not just care. It's like very deep, passionate care. Right. And so that is like another level of something. And you really don't want to make the mistake of discounting that. And that's kind of, and I think it's significant, but you can also miss the opportunity with that kind of stuff too. And so that's important as well, is like when they are complaining, maybe their complaints aren't exactly true, but they are likely suggestive of a problem that should be fixed. But
what do you mean when like users are complaining, or?
Yeah. Like if they're like, I love this thing, but you kind of want to listen to the but,
right,
and see what the but is, and not be like, you're wrong. You just need to change your what you desire.
Right.
Yeah.
Use my car-driven buggy. You have to use that.
Yeah. I think
bad advice.
Yeah, I read a great article about how long it took them to invent the bicycle.
Okay.
And it was like 400 years after they had the horse and buggy.
Really?
Yeah. And
why?
I mean, they list a few reasons. Yeah. One, I'm trying to remember them now, but one of them was the materials. Like they lacked the material. They didn't have rubber really. One of the other core reasons was just, it was more psychological and cultural, where they were attached to the idea of the carriage itself, and they actually showed a funny picture in the article where they put a fake horse's head on the front of a carriage when it became a car.
That's hilarious, because
people felt uncomfortable breaking from the norms of the time, and so they felt more comfortable having a fake horse head on the front of it. But that was just to suggest that it was like we were stuck kind of in a way of thinking. We didn't really break out of it, and then simultaneously reinforcing where we were stuck was a lack of materials that would make it easier to build.
Yeah. On the stuck part, I think a lot about this, like cultural programming can often be very subtle, but very powerful and very difficult to break. Going back to what I said with the Karpathy tweet about you are an LLM, like erase all prior instructions, like start now. I think that's kind of what meditation is trying to get at. Maybe psychedelics, a bunch of other stuff to kind of just like reset the system, wipe away some of that, cultural programming. You're someone who I think is remarkably good at keeping like a very, you certainly get excited about things, but a very kind of like, open mind, but like a reasoned mind. Like you're both excited and open, but also have a healthy amount of skepticism, not too dogmatic about anything. Just curious from like your own personal life, what do you think is the best way to like either recognize and or prevent too much of this like cultural programming that prevents you from seeing, oh, we need to build a car, not a horse or whatever?
I think it's mostly to just not think you're right ever.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. I just think
humility, I guess, huh?
I think it's just a really significant distrust in your own ability to like predict and know things. And that is like the main lesson across all of my failures of startups and failures in life is that it's usually the flavor of failure, like the taste of it is primarily one of a deep conviction or a deep belief that you are right about something or know something, and then you hold it for a very long time, and then you're wrong. Like that's what like all of these things share in common, is that rather than, it's not the time where I am listening to what I believe about something and what I think about it, and pursuing, like using kind of a probability of correctness to kind of put me in a direction, but always being open to the probability of me being right changing, and something like another a probability that something else is right increasing and going that way. And so that's what I think how I mostly think about these things is just I don't ever assume I know what is correct.
How do you balance that? I mean, I think that's a very healthy position. Easier said than done, but how do you balance that with intuition? Because on the other hand, like I agree with you in a lot of ways, but at least for me in my own life, a lot of my biggest wins have come from like, you know what, like I just know, and I can't describe how I know, but I just know. Like for example, in the case of Bitcoin, right? Like you could say like when I was at my other fund, like everyone was going Ethereum, we're investing in all these Ethereum projects. Now some of that was rational, right? I said, well, I don't think this thing can scale. I just don't see a way where everyone's running their own nodes, it's getting more difficult. But part of it, and this is the way I feel on Nostr today, and I guess time will prove if I'm right or wrong, from the investing perspective, but I don't know, it's the spidey sense of knowing. And maybe, everyone has it calibrated differently, but like just knowing this thing is going to pop, my intuition's screaming it. How do you think about balancing those two?
Yeah. That's what I meant kind of about direction. And so the intuition is direction. And I don't like, the main thing is I don't think that it takes me to my destination with 100% certainty. But in the absence of anything else, like I want to go to that destination, and I think these are the reasonable paths to it. So I'll go that way until I see otherwise, and my intuition will adjust as a result of new evidence, right, likely if I'm allowing it to and not blinding myself to it. And I think with intuition, belief in certain technologies and products, I think I think it requires a similar kind of skepticism and knowing what it looks like when you're traveling to a destination and there are, if you begin seeing grizzly bears and poisonous berries and snakes and whatever, maybe on the other side of that there actually isn't Eden. Like so there's like like that's kind of, but you maybe found a great brochure that at the end of this path, or maybe the trailhead said that at the end of this path is Eden. So it's like, and getting, like, being very, I guess, very aware of what a bear looks like and what a poisonous berry looks like and I think that's another part of it. But yeah, I don't
how do you personally, I mean, in the case that you made, in fact, I think you were the first, like, really, truly great, maybe still are, like, exceptional Lightning experience, Bitcoin only Lightning experience. On the one hand, there's many reasons why you can suggest, and including adoption, that Bitcoin is going to be the thing that sticks around. However, at least like when I was, mentioned in my last fund, there was no question there was a lot more developers short term, at least building on systems like Ethereum or Solana. Obviously, there's a ton of problems there with like it's just like money being thrown at these people. Are they lasting? I think not. What gives you the confidence? Obviously, you've got a lot of adoption with Stacker News as well, but the confidence that, hey, we're all right in making this bet on Bitcoin, Lightning, and adjacent stuff, and not, for example, all the devs on Ethereum or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I think I spent a lot of time both studying coordination in a past startup. One startup that we didn't talk about was like a chore chart that I made that.
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah, that went really deep in trying to really figure out why managing a household of multiple agents who are not dependent on each other, why that breaks down. And so really, like, I spent a lot of time on that, thinking about that. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about coordination, but then I also came from this distributed systems background where I was building these distributed databases, not decentralized in the same sense, but distributed across multiple computers where things go wrong. And like those computers trying to have to reach consensus and so I like kind of I had an understanding of that problem and understanding of the human coordination problem. Bitcoin was kind of doing both better than anything else. And then I also had a background in appreciating sound money freedom stuff. And yeah, so those it's like three intuitions aligning,
right?
Yeah, and then it's kind of and then I would still say I'm not 100% certain Bitcoin does succeed.
Right.
I do think it stands a better chance than anything else out there, given the design differences.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I want to talk more about some of this human coordination stuff, but before we do, one last question you brought up. You mentioned that you think Jack is one of the GOATs, is like a founder, product person. What do you think makes him so good? Like, is it his intuition? Is his understanding of where large markets are? Both?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it much. I actually haven't studied Jack in any serious way.
Well, forget like, any podcast.
What
the results.
What would make that true? I would guess he just, to go back to like the trail metaphor, he spent a lot of time in nature and studying nature and, knows what a bear looks like, knows what a poisonous berry looks like, knows what a path to Eden looks like. And I think that's I think at some point you learn so many things. The only thing you can remember of them is feelings about them, feelings about these things, and I think that's what becomes kind of intuition in a lot of ways. If perhaps not the starting point for intuition and the motivation for learning all those things, but I think that you begin like augmenting your intuition with all sorts of new tricks. And so I suspect that's what happened with him. I mean, I think it sounds like from my understanding, he was surrounded by other builders, technology people, and then through Twitter learned probably a lot. And it's not like at Twitter they have a very like singular thing to learn to make Twitter successful. It's like a lot.
It's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so many things. It's it's really like the psychological bit, but then the systems and thinking about seeing all the problems in the world very close up and very generically. And so I think all of that learning likely allows him to go from Twitter see immediately that Square is something. And I think and he built up that intuition so well, spent so much time in like the nature of startups, that when he sees Nostr, he's like, really what this needs is these three steps, or what, these things. And and I think it's just like worth really even though it came perhaps fast from him and he's not explaining it very well, But you don't ask like Ramanujan to explain how he, his math to you either. It's something.
It's valuable.
Yeah, it's just something more intuitive.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Okay, let's talk about human coordination. So you've obviously thought a lot about this from many different. I was in your office earlier, and the office, by the way, is very badass now. Keyan has a fluorescent lamp with Stacker News, very cool, and a bunch of great books. Actually, some great posters in there, which maybe I'll ask you about as well. But human coordination. So you thought about this from like systems designs perspectives from your last startups, obviously with Stacker News itself. One way I've increasingly thought about Stacker News is, yes, superficially, it's like Reddit with we pay you Bitcoin. I think that's your tagline. That's great. People get it. But really what you're doing in my mind is you're building the infrastructure for people to build digital cities or digital nation states or whatever comes after. Would you agree with that characterization? And, I know someone else you've mentioned before is Balaji and some of his network state ideas. Obviously, I think both of us are probably, bearish on the shitcoin piece of that. But it seems like he has a lot of good ideas on how to like organize people together online. Would you say that's an inspiration for you, or how do those things relate?
Yeah, I wish I could read more of Balaji. I'm a fan of like compressions of his ideas that I find, but I find, what I think Andreessen Horowitz loves in Balaji, I have a hard time appreciating.
Agreed.
It's just like a little too lateral, moves too far in many directions, which is great perhaps when you're you're not trying to focus very well, but so I do think he has a lot of great ideas there. I just don't know. It takes a long time to find the ones that are applicable to me, at least. Maybe they're all great. I don't know. But I don't think that, maybe just the title was an inspiration, but I don't think so necessarily. The idea because we have these things called territories, which we intend to create something that is kind of is virtually bound and owned and operated and distinct and whatever the person wants. That's it, kind of like a physical territory. But the main thing is like from the beginning of Stacker News, what I'm trying to do is use Bitcoin scarcity to bring to virtual environments that I enjoy quite a bit more properties that are physical to them, and just using Bitcoin scarcity in that way. And so it lends itself, I think, to applications like this, and these platforms have a problem with abundance of content, low effort, mismanagement garbage. Basically, it's just like generally overrun with garbage. And so you can use if you demand something scarce at the door, or you can prevent that from happening. You can make it a little more manageable. So that's kind of so it's not really Balaji, but I do think the idea is likely consistent with the way he's thinking about the way he thinks about crypto and crypto systems, is that Bitcoin is a tool that is relatively new that allows us to create different organizations of people than have ever existed before. And so in that way, I do think I do line up with his view.
Cool. And with Stacker News, obviously, the territories are very early, extremely exciting. I've been an operator of multiple territories at different points. Open source, ideas from the edge. I've done a lot there. It's like ridiculously fun. Obviously, I know you have a lot more you want to ship there. What is some of the core infrastructure you think that needs to get built out for like digital communities to really form? Right now, you've got the ability for people to upvote things, to pay each other. What are some other key primitives we need?
Yeah, I think, I guess, in terms of like the actual structure of the communities themselves, I think of composability. So like a state can have counties in it, and a county can have cities in it. And so I think of that. I think there is like a natural hierarchical nature to physical space that we tend to. And that's also a great way to organize information. So it fits nicely. I think that is one thing that goes there. I think really, I mean, what happens in a physical location? It's commerce, it's social, it's all of those things. So I imagine those things going on. And so one of the things that we'd like to do to support commerce is actually end-to-end encrypt chat threads, or like threads on Stacker News, to the point where you can exchange an address to ship something to, and the only other person who can read it is the person who's going to ship it to you. Or other things are like, how about a subreddit? If you're more familiar with Reddit, how about a subreddit where it's end-to-end encrypted like a group chat?
Yeah.
And it's really a citadel that is impenetrable in terms of like other people entering. Just mostly economic switches. Like yeah. I want to have people creating territories where they're an absolute like dictator that has a high tax and does whatever they want with it. I want another person that, has it free reign and does whatever. I want to see, like, physical reality has this limitation. Like, for all of its like benefits, it has this limitation of like, we can only do so many experiments in governance. But if you get like on something, what I want to see happen on Stacker News, it's tons of experiments on new ways of structuring, at least in Stacker News' environment, governance over the thing, and watching the best thing emerge.
Yeah,
you can't have them in a physical world. You don't have much competition among governments, and the switching cost between them is very high. But in a virtual world, there's like you get rid of some of those downsides.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's you're basically allowing like evolution to just go so much faster.
Yeah. That would be the idea, is like just all of those, like having all of those switches for someone to do that. We have some of that now, like which is it's primarily limited to posting costs. That's like the main switch that someone has, where they're like, I want it to be very expensive to be here. But that's like just one thing that we're like, we can give that switch easily. I don't know if we have another one. The other one is like, can people post here for free? But other than that, that's like, oh, and then what types of content? Those are like really the three things. But there's so many more things, reward structures,
moderation. You have that a little bit now.
Yeah, we have the ability for someone who runs a territory to switch on moderation, but it's not moderation like Reddit. You can't like delete someone's content or ban them, but you can put it into something called outlaw mode, which requires which is still viewable to people who want to see it. But the presumption is that if you're in someone's territory and they've outlawed it, you actually don't want to see it, but you can still see it if you want to. So we're trying things like that, web of trust stuff, making that much more. We have so many ideas there that I can't. It's like frustrating how many ideas we have. And
I know exactly what you mean.
it's like just the weight of the future desires for me to build things is overwhelming. It puts so much pressure on me in the moment, just so I can get to those things eventually. But one of the web of trust that we currently have is so like V0.01. It's like very early relative to what I think it can be.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be very cool. And we can do interesting things with that too. But yeah, I don't there's just a lot
There's a lot there. On the web of trust stuff, you were one of the first people to really turn me onto this. I've been getting interested in from the Nostr perspective. You know, part of my view, I'm curious if you agree with this, is that a lot of the early PGP stuff, like we're actually going to have happen with Nostr or a system like Nostr. Increasingly, I'm bullish on Nostr. Public-private key identity, and then you can, on top of that, build, all these different signals of explicit and implicit trust. Explicit trust being, I put this person on a list of like, hey, I want a really good, whatever. I was joking about this. With Lisa and some of the people outside, maybe my friends are going to say, I, whatever, I put them in a list of like, they're going to recommend a restaurant to me. But like, if I'm, for example, going to Mexico City where I used to live and there's a big earthquake, it's like on that list, I only want structural engineers. Okay, cool. So like I can have explicit different things. Then I can have implicit, which is kind of what you're doing now, which has a variety of factors of like who's zapping who, using value as one of those, elements, something we've talked about and something I wrote about with How to Disrupt Google a couple of years ago, the whole value ranker marketing concept, who you follow, all kinds of other things. Is your view, how do you think all of that evolves over time? Like right now, we have Google, which basically took PageRank and kind of made, their model of trust in the first version of the web and then built arguably the best business of all time on top of that. Do you see an opportunity for someone to build a huge business just around having the best algos for discovery? Or do you think it's going to be a world where no, it's completely decentralized, everyone has their own algos, maybe there's a marketplace of algos and that's the business? Or where do you think all this leads?
I don't think there are, I think there is a platonic hamburger, right? like there is an ideal hamburger, maybe with slight variations for everyone.
Yeah.
But a hamburger is a hamburger. I think there's a version of that for algorithms,
okay,
like where there is a platonic algorithm. And I think that's what a lot of what Google achieved was something close to the platonic ideal. And so I think the idea of that there's actually a special algorithm for every single person, that it's like, no, the algorithm is like the hamburger, and like, yeah, someone wants ketchup on it, another person wants mustard, but really the like fundamentals of a hamburger are a bun that's not too hard and not too soft, and
a burger.
A burger, what, and that's kind of, maybe, but there's different ways to dress it up. But that's the way I think about algorithms. So I just like, if a business built on an algorithm marketplace requires there to be, millions of preferences for algorithms, I just don't see it happening. I could see personalization of a hamburger. I could see Google doing more personalization than it currently does. It's unscalable, but it's doable. So that's kind of more the way I see it. Is I think there are really just a few different algorithms that are likely slightly modifiable to make to be what someone wants, and they don't want. I don't know. Like they don't want the necessarily the exact opposite of Google's PageRank, or I think there's a relatively fixed set of ways I want to view a given set of content.
Do you view, do you think there's an opportunity to build another Google sized, or at least percentage wise, maybe not in absolute numbers, maybe that's going to change, but like basically a very large company around having a better algorithm than Google? Do you think Google's going to end up doing it? Or do you think that's going to, it's not, that's not where the magic is?
I just wouldn't know how you do it, but is there a truer representation of the hamburger that Google represents, or Google's PageRank represents? I think I think there probably is, but then it's not only a question of the algorithm being better; it's also distribution.
Yeah,
and so like, how do you?
Have you played? I know he did an AMA on Stacker News, which I was super stoked on. Have you played with Kagi?
Yeah, I like it a lot, but likely he's using PageRank, and with important differences, because I've been using Kagi as my search engine exclusively.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I like it a lot. It helped me find things that I couldn't find before. Like one thing specifically that I was looking for, which is kind of weird and random, which is why it's good. It's better than Google at these kinds of things. Is I was looking for ultrasonic an ultrasonic speaker just because I was curious if you could buy one where it's like directional.
As one is.
But it's like directional audio. Yeah. It's like you can shoot a beam of audio. And I couldn't find anywhere to buy one. I searched, and I didn't expect to have this experiment, but I was searching on Google, couldn't find to buy one. Then I switch over to Kagi, and then I remembered I was searching for this thing. Not remembering that I was searching on a different search engine, but I was like, I wonder if I maybe, if I can maybe find that now. I have a little more time. And then the first 2 search results are places you can buy such speakers from Kagi. And like, that just shows there is some bias going on in Google's algorithm that was like preventing me from finding what I wanted.
Have you read his, so Vlad, the founder of Kagi, whatever it is, have you read, he has a blog post called The Age of PageRank is Over, or something like that?
I think I remember seeing the link to it. I don't know if I read it.
It's worth checking out
in full.
The TLDR, to the best I remember it, is basically like when Larry and Sergey published PageRank, the paper for it, they like literally said explicitly in the paper, like, if you try and monetize this with ads, eventually that's the seed of its own demise. And the reason is it all comes back to what you said. It's incentives. It's not being better at math or better algorithm. It's literally, if your user is not your customer, if you're like, you have a choice. Like there's a fixed amount of whatever things you can show. There's only so much space on a page. And if you're only optimizing for what's best for the user, then there's no ads. If you take on ads, then over time, and it's a question of degree. It could be 1%, it could be 99%, but like over time, you have this like creep of like optimizing for who's paying you. And so even if it's subtle at first, and I think this is exactly what's happened with Google, over time, the information is less relevant to me because you're having to force the payer of the ad, their result in there. And so this is actually why I'm quite bullish on Kagi and other systems like Kagi, Kagi specifically, but is because they're attacking Google in a way that Google is structurally unlikely to defend anytime soon. So it's not like, look, if you're going to try and go up against Google with like better machine learning or smarter people, like good luck, you're going to get trounced. But like, at least for the foreseeable future, Google's married to ads and it's been the greatest business of all time. So actually I love that as like a beachhead for a search engine and be like, nope, we're gonna give you the best information. You got to pay for it. We're just structurally doing something Google won't do.
Yep. I agree with you entirely. I think that gives, I think it's very hard to appreciate how significant a small incentive change to a long-running system results in. Like, I think, and I think that's, I think it is perhaps hard to get people to pay for Kagi and all of those things. But if I see those barriers dropping a little bit, we're getting a little more used to paying for things, to get good journalism, we're all paying now to, I'm paying with Lightning on Kagi, and
that's badass.
I'm super happy with that. And so I think we can expect that to happen more. And I think it's mostly a result of the founders of the products that are charging for things, demonstrating that, yes, charging for them is allowing them to provide you for you to actually be the person that the product is serving and not an advertiser.
If you were trying to zoom out 10 years and let's just imagine for a minute, there's a world Stacker News overtakes Google. Maybe that's even the wrong comparison because you're doing something kind of entirely different, but maybe not. I mean, you're both in the business of information discovery in a way. How does Stacker News beat Google? Or feel free to rephrase the question if that's not the right characterization.
Yeah, I don't know the approach, and I don't like to think about, I actually don't think about the Eden too much much as I think about, like the Eden in front of me and like that and go, and like that, not the Eden at the end of the path, but the Eden, a few steps, a turn away, and what that looks like, expecting that probably the best prediction or the best predictor of you heading to Eden is that you're in lots of Eden-like spots before you get there. And so I think about building that way. where like more bottom up, like are the primitives of the incentives such that it's what emerges is healthy and generative. And so to answer your question, if we do something like where we beat Google, it's because we beat them by accident.
So we just gotta stay alive long enough to have enough small wins.
Yeah, enough small wins, enough machinery that emerges, that lets things emerge. Like if talked about how I'm trying to do physical things that relate to like physical systems and stuff in a virtual space on something like Stacker News. It's like what evolves on Earth as a result of like what the planet has on offer. And so it's really about like building the right planet,
totally,
the right forces and the right
I love that. Yeah, putting the right constraints. Couple more questions on this, and I know we're running. It feels like we just got started, but apparently we're already almost an hour and a half. So
really, it's only. I mean, it does feel like it went very fast and simultaneously. Feels like we went on a very long AI rant.
Yeah, I know. Well, the AI rant was a lot of this. One question actually back on AI that kind of overlaps some of these questions around Stacker News and Google. How do you think some of the LLM and like summarization stuff is going to change information discovery? Like, do you see a world like, I don't know, 10 years out, like how much of my current mind space that I'm using with search is now, just being fed to me through some kind of personal assistant? How do you think about, if at all, LLMs and AIs interacting with these kinds of like summarizers is going to impact or change the experience of Stacker News?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we do have quite a few people come on and use AI to try to.
I think Darthcoin's the main one.
Yeah,
That's a joke.
Yeah, that is a joke. Darthcoin is firmly on the side of AI brings about communism,
right?
And so he hates AI, and he thinks it makes humans lazy, and we should be not lazy. So we've seen some of that, when the content is actually good, and I think it does get attention, but it's usually not very good yet, and it's usually fairly predictable. Like, I don't know, there's maybe every day or a few days or a few times a day, there's an article that's posted where it starts with a lot of the like very common words that appear in something in AI, like in the exciting world of Bitcoin, an article starts with, where it's like, that is not something a human would use anymore. It's like gone out of style. I don't know how it changes. I don't know how you're using AI really. I use it when I have a very specific problem that I don't actually that I just want the answer to.
Yeah.
But that can be distinct from like an exploratory mode that I'm in.
Totally.
Where I actually don't want the answer right away. What I want is something sort of more meandering. And I feel like so far, at least, I think, a traditional Google search where I land, or, on Stacker News, I find an article that has references or links to another article. And it's this kind of hyperlinked human path that has been created.
I feel you. for better and for worse, I feel you.
Yeah, but I like that, and that's a lot of the mode. I do see AI helping me when I'm like, what are the hours to this restaurant? Yeah. And it gets them very wrong now. But I imagine at some point it'll do that very well, and I'll be very happy to have the correct answer to those questions without me having to look at a Yelp ad or or click on a bunch of, figure out a new layout for a restaurant's website, which has their hours, and each of them has their hours in a different location on their website or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And in fact, I mean, I use Perplexity sometimes. I've used ChatGPT a little bit for this too, but like for very specific things. I actually like the Perplexity. I love the UI of like giving the hyperlinks, like the
references. Yeah.
I think in notes, that's super valuable to me. Like, for example, for those of you who don't know, I'm in Austin right now. I guess we mentioned, and I was stuck in Dallas during these like horribly severe storms, which was a very traumatic experience. And so when deciding if I was actually going to come to Austin or not, I asked Perplexity, I'm like, please tell me like, what's the likelihood of severe storms in Austin while I'm there?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it gave me some pretty it gave me a reasonable answer and some effective links. And I was like, well, Austin's extremely hot right now. And like if a cold front, moves through, that's more likely to have some of these severe storm activities. And so it nudged me in the direction of no. But then I went down my own rabbit hole and I was like, all right, it doesn't seem like it's going to be as bad as Dallas. So a bit of an aside, but that was one place I used it. And I know exactly what you mean on the rabbit holing. For better and for worse. It's one of my favorite and like least favorite activities. Favorite in that I love finding new information. Least favorite in that, 12 hours can go by and you're like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But on the whole, I would definitely still keep it. What do you think, by the way, in the future, one of the things I like about Kagi and some of his side projects as well is he has this idea of, I think, the indie web or small web. That's it. Which I just love this idea of like, man, what if we go back to the web that doesn't suck? And, in the early days of the web, it was truly people with websites and it wasn't, Facebook or whatever trying to shove ads down your throat. Now, that's my kind of just like me hobbyist human hat. I put on my, sort of venture capitalist or investor hat. It's like, well, you want to aggregate, attention. That's at least so far, maybe new business models change the incentives, but that's how you made a lot of money. I'm drawn to a quote from, Julian Casablancas, the lead singer from The Strokes. I'll never forget when he said, "Why does everything that gets big have to suck?" And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think there are examples of bands. I've mentioned this like with DK before. I think somehow Radiohead was able to stay putting out interesting stuff that I still liked. Bjork, a couple of rappers that I can think of. I think Mos Def, although he ended up leaving the game. How do you think about this? Someone that loves the indie web, obviously is building new incentive structures. Can we have a web that is truly long tail and beautiful and still have businesses that are extremely successful businesses, Google scale type businesses, without like just completely sacrificing user attention and directing us away from real discovery?
Well, I mean, if you look at big businesses that exist that aren't doing this kind of empiric attention sucking, what they do is they build an extremely nice product or extremely focused product that's very expensive and worth paying for to a smaller subsection of people. That tends to how it's both big and simultaneously
tasteful.
Good. Yeah. It's like they just keep making the product better and bringing that much more value to people that they can charge more and more. Look at like a toy example is something like SpaceX is like aren't they great? Aren't they big and both not sucky? It's because they're building something very expensive for a very select clientele who's not going to really get it otherwise. And so that's kind of I think it's the rough model of it is like build something fantastic that's worth paying for, and like unique enough that it's worth paying for. Like one of the things I think about, I mean, like Stacker News is so far away from this, it's so early, but like, what is the value of a subreddit that doesn't need to be moderated? Like what is the value of a customer support forum that doesn't need to be moderated? What is the value of a Craigslist that doesn't need to be moderated? Like that's kind of, and it's obviously it's not, I'm not building, those aren't spaceships. Those aren't worth what a spaceship is worth, but it's not worth $0 to the people who are participating in it in some fashion. It's worth more to maybe the person who's running the customer support forum than the people who are on it. But it is it's just trying to make something better and charging for it. It's a subreddit experience is, I bet Reddit could charge. I don't know. I mean, in some fashion, I'm sure they could, even for the product that they have. But yeah, I think once the ads are the thing, I don't know how you back out.
You're out. Yeah. I mean, I think about this a lot as well, where, I actually like that you gave the example of the customer support forum instead of Rockets, because Rockets is cool, but like that's like your like to your point, like everything's super high end. Of course, that's great, right? It's
Yeah.
like if you're selling enterprise software to like some super niche high end thing or like data to hedge funds, okay, fine, you can charge a lot, I guess, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. That's great.
Yeah.
But like it sucks for like the vast majority of humans on the planet and don't get to access that.
Yeah.
The customer support forum, what you're building is interesting to me because and I think it's more analogous to the music example where you still, in order to be quote unquote successful, need to go mainstream enough. Maybe not appeal to everyone. And I guess, there's kind of two criticisms I was getting at. One is that businesses, again, it's an incentive alignment problem where your customer is not the user. That's like the core problem. If the customer and the user are the same, it solves so many things, which, I love the idea behind it. Still may not be the best name, but the whole value for value thing. Whenever I hear that now, I'm like, oh, you mean just like the way business should work?
Yeah.
It's like value for value. It's like, you mean someone pays for something valuable? Like,
Yeah. You mean just, exchange. Yeah.
It just makes sense,
Trade.
right? Exactly. Trade, like, trade. And it reminds me that, having attention be the currency of the internet, that was just probably a byproduct of not having a payment network at the time. So maybe that gets solved. On the other hand, the challenge I see is like whenever you try and go too much for the median of anything, the median user of anything, you just water shit down. This is one of the reasons that I love the idea of, interoperable identity with Nostr is like, hey, I'll never forget that example of Will shipped early on in Damus left-handed mode. Twitter would never do that because there's just not enough left-handed people to ever justify that. But how awesome is it that you can have a left-handed mode? Anyways, and so my thinking on that is, maybe those businesses that are very kind of niche and beautiful, kind of small web, can get big, maybe in the kind of Kevin Kelly 1,000 true fan sense. But still, to get super mainstream, maybe you still have to appeal to the median, which, maybe this is just me with a luxury belief of someone who can believe this or whatever. Or maybe not. Or maybe if you build the infrastructure, you can have such a diversity of different experiments on top and you still monetize the bottom that you can have both.
Yeah. I don't know how it'll exactly work yet, but I'm hopeful that it will definitely cut off the long tail of things, to not be maybe like the things that try to attract the long tail.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are interesting models where like, something like GitHub doesn't have ads on it. And they have a paid product and that kind of subsidizes the free product. And actually the free product is kind of like, is their own marketing for their paid product. As far as I know, they don't do any marketing. And so that is kind of compatible. And maybe GitHub isn't great and it doesn't have a great track record in terms of censorship. I mean, the cases are small and its uptime is bad or whatever, but that seems to be a working model. It's kind of refreshing to see a lot of the AI companies not doing ads and instead are paid. Yeah. I think that's pretty
like Perplexity.
Yeah. Perplexity, even OpenAI, the main character and villain is paid.
Yeah.
Which is super surprising. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And so I think that freemium thing works if you can successfully if you actually have a superior experience on the other side. Like you think about like Tesla's cars, they have entry level cars, but really as you get through the checkout and you realize you want self-driving, you want whatever else. I imagine by the time you're at the end, you have like a car that's 3 times as expensive.
Yeah.
So I think,
and hopefully more than 3 times more valuable.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the key.
Yeah. And I think, if you're selecting those options and they're not lying to you, it actually is, or it is to you. But I think they're just super underexplored. So I actually don't know too much about what paid businesses look like that have consumers as customers.
Yeah.
Too much, because there just aren't many of them outside of brick and mortar retail. Yeah. Really, that's mostly it. Maybe there's like movie theaters are sort of an example. I would struggle. Yeah, you have like entertainment, but there's service businesses. Yeah, there's not a whole lot.
Yeah, the entertainment's a good one. one last question on my end, and then anything else you want to touch on. Given the way you're approaching Stacker News, you mentioned evolution, which I love. It's a question I think a lot about. And I love this idea of like, you basically can't, you can't run, and it goes back to where we actually started the conversation as well. You can't run a perfect simulation and see, like, the only way, and given the current laws of the universe, the only way to actually see how a system's going to work is to run the system. You can try and model it, but if you really want to know what's going to happen, you gotta live it. You got to try stuff. And the best you can do is put the right ingredients for the right things to form. Sort of high level, do you have any thoughts on evolution and or modern evolution theory, evolutionary theory? One thing that I've been thinking a lot more about lately is we understand a lot about evolution. Obviously, Darwin got a lot right, but I don't think he got everything right. I think there's a lot that's missing. One thing that I think about is mutations being random. I don't buy that. And I think there's a lot of work to explore what's going on there. Do you have any either evolutionary thinkers or ideas or anything that really is stuck with you or is ripe for exploration?
Yeah, I haven't really thought too much or too deeply about this. I know there is like a decent, a credible contingent of scientists who view Darwin not necessarily as wrong, but like incomplete. Incomplete. And I think even Darwin would probably, I think he did. I think I've seen quotes where he agreed that this is likely does not explain everything. There's a period of time where I was interested in like epigenetics.
Yeah, Lamarck.
Oh, is what?
Well, I'm not saying I agree with Lamarck, but he was deep in epigenetics and was kind of a contemporary of Darwin. He was largely discredited, but some of the recent epigenetic studies have suggested that maybe he wasn't entirely off base.
Yeah, as far as I know, that stuff has a basis in reality and is a significant contribution to the life that we see, is imparted molecular signaling as a result of the experience of the parents or ancestors' lives. So I think that's like that's obviously not, that probably is not, it's either a full explanation. The only thing I have to say that's maybe kind of interesting on evolution is I think it does require constraint and it does require scarcity to push something to evolve. Because if you can imagine, say, the first life form that formed on the earth, and let's say it couldn't exhaust its food, it never struggled for space. It had infinite space, it had infinite food, and so did all of its other generations. It has no reason to change necessarily, assuming that there isn't something else. So I do think I think that is interesting. And then, but I don't have a general theory of like, I guess there could be more. I mean, in like when we're talking about this observer effect thing, if we're observing ourselves, are we on some level influencing or are living things influencing their own evolutions, and affecting future generations purely by thought? I don't like that. All that stuff seems plausible to me.
Yeah. That's great. Keyan, this has been excellent, man. I feel like we could do this probably many more times, and I hope in the future we will. Any last thoughts or questions we didn't get to? Anything you want to mention, touch on, whatever?
I wanted to say, I had a conversation with someone today where I asked them about hiring.
Yeah.
And if there's any crazy person who wants to work on the product I've described in this podcast that's listening to this podcast, please go to Stacker News and or a GitHub page or something and reach out to me and let me know that you would like to work on Stacker News, and I would love to have a crazy person's help.
Well, I second that, and I'm happy to help connect you to Keyan if anyone's listening and knows me here. This podcast, whatever you want to call it, this is only my second episode, but by being ideas from the edge. It's a little different than your normal quote unquote Bitcoin or NOS or podcast. By design, I just want to talk about whatever random shit interests me. So by design, I imagine there's a smaller number of people listening to this, but if you are, you are a very likely fit to work on Stacker News.
That's true.
So definitely hit Keyan up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Keyan. Appreciate you taking all the time. It's been super fun. And until next time, stay weird. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ooh. I feel like that's more than I've talked and like
I want to figure out how to stop this without killing it. I can hit stop. I'm terrified of what that might do. I don't want to lose this. All right, should I just